Welcome to the Careers by Jen podcast, episode 225. This time on the podcast, Jen speaks with Celeste Headlee about how to manage a relationship with a colleague you don't agree with. Manage the relationship? Why can't we just avoid them or talk about them behind their backs, like in the good old days?
You're listening to the Careers by Jen podcast with me, Jen Swanson, the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. Welcome to the show. My conversation today is with Celeste Headlee. Celeste is an award-winning journalist, a professional speaker, and the best-selling author of a couple of books. The first one is called Herd Mentality, that's H-E-A-R-D, and the second one is We Need to Talk, How to Have Conversations That Matter. In her 20-year career in public radio, she's been the executive producer of On Second Thought at Georgia Public Radio, and she's anchored programs including Tell Me More, Talk of the Nation, All Things Considered, and Weekend Edition. She also served as co-host of the national morning news show The Takeaway from PRI and WNYC, and she anchored the U.S. presidential coverage in 2012 for PBS World Channel. Celeste has a TedX talk called Sharing 10 Ways to Have a Better Conversation, and that talk has had over 20 million views to date. Celeste has a wealth of experience and has a lot of information to share with us today, and I began our conversation by asking, is it really possible to manage a relationship? We'll get to her answer and our conversation right after this.
You've updated your resume, you've sent it out, and you've been selected for an interview. Congratulations! And now, you want to get ready. Really ready. This is where Careers by Jen can help. We have a comprehensive online course called How to Ace a Job Interview When You Haven't Interviewed in a Long Time. This video-based course is jam-packed with information, advice, and exercises to help you get completely prepared to walk into an interview situation with confidence. From exactly what to prepare in advance, to how to answer common questions, to what questions you might ask the interviewer, and so much more, this course is designed to get you ready. Visit careersbyjen.com and click on Training Resources to see the curriculum, preview a couple of the introductory lessons, and see what others who have taken the course are saying about it. Visit careersbyjen.com and get ready to ace your next interview.
So Celeste Headlee, I'm going to begin by asking you, is it possible to actually manage a relationship?
Yes. You can certainly, I think it's a gray area because it depends on what the person means by manage. And I say that because very often when people talk about managing a relationship, what they really mean is, can I change another person? And that answer is no. You cannot. You can't change their behavior. You can't make them think differently. You can't convince them to agree with you. But you can manage yourself and your own behavior, and that can have big impacts on the way other people treat you and interact with you. So the answer is yes and no.
Okay, so when we're talking about how to manage a relationship with a colleague you don't agree with or a colleague you don't like, you're actually talking about managing yourself, and by doing that, it will have an effect upon the relationship.
Yeah, and I think about this a lot. One example of a way you can manage that is in managing expectations. People don't often think about the prep work that should occur before a conversation begins. Now, let me be careful here. People often think about what they're going to say in a conversation, but they don't think about what it is they need to know from the other person. In other words, what questions do you have for that other person? They also rarely think about the environment and the location and the time of day that might be most conducive to a good interaction. So you want to make sure that both you and the other person are comfortable and refreshed and not tired or stressed out. And when is that for you? Is it first thing in the morning when you get there? Is it right before you're ready to leave? You can think about ways in which you can sort of manage the location of the conversation, and it can make that difficult conversation have a better outcome in the end. So that's just an example of some of the things you can manage and change.
And what, that isn't always possible if the conversation is urgent and has to happen immediately. But if you've got the time to do it, what might be some of the ways you could ask the other person if they're ready to have a conversation?
Yeah, I mean, you can literally just ask them that. And I want to also say one more thing, which is that sometimes the reason something becomes urgent, not always, but sometimes the reason something becomes urgent is because we've avoided the conversation for too long. One of the biggest causes of merger failure and acquisition failure is organizational silence, which means organizational silence is when people stop talking about things that they think are going to cause an argument. Or they think is going to cause conflict. So I think that sometimes what is a regular difficult conversation can become an urgent conversation just by putting it off. That's first. Yeah, you're going to say something.
No, I was just going to say it's that whole, what are we not talking about question.
Correct. I would highly recommend you not wait until a conversation becomes urgent. So if an employee or someone you work with is habitually late or misses deadlines, you don't wait until the stakes for that deadline are incredibly high to bring it up. You problem solve with that person earlier on. So that's the first part of that. But when you do have the time to sort of manage that, one of the easiest things to do is say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about blah, 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 because it's caused a few issues, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on how we might solve it. When's a good time for you? And there's a couple things going on in what I just said. Number one, you're not keeping things secret. One of the worst things you can do is say, hey, do you have time to chat? And they'll say, about what? And they'll say, just some things that are occurring. We keep these secrets, and I don't know why we do that. It just raises people's anxiety levels. So it's best just to be upfront about it, allay people's concerns. And also, the other thing I did when I said that was I invited them to problem solve with me, which means I wasn't saying, I want to bring you into my office to blame you and tell you how you screwed these things up. It's, this thing went wrong. I'm not sure what caused it. It might as easily be my fault as it is yours. So let's talk about what happened. And that's a much better conversation for them than explain yourself. You don't ever want to put them in a defensive position, because quite literally what's happening inside the brain when someone's getting defensive is they're responding to an attack.
So it's a collaborative model rather than I'm right and you're wrong, and what are you going to do about it?
That's exactly right. And if you need more convincing, it's that you probably aren't right. I mean, that's true of both people. And the reason I say that is because you are making decisions based on your version of the story. And I know that feels really, really right. And probably it is from your perspective, but when you add in the other person's perspective, you become less right. So it's more about filling in the gaps of your own perception of what's going wrong or what's happening than it is about proving you're right.
Now, if we're talking about a colleague who's not necessarily someone you're supervising or managing, what are the dynamics there?
I think a lot of it stays mostly the same. So again, you're going to keep that collaborative problem-solving approach to them. And I don't mean that just as some sort of trick or hack you're learning to pretend like you're trying to collaborate or pretend that you're curious about their perspective. You need to check yourself before you wreck yourself and actually be curious. And actually go into that saying, my goal is to solve this problem, so let's work on this together. That's number one. So you can go to the coworker and you can remind both of you of your shared mission. We both want to get this project done on time. There's some things going wrong with that. And I'm hoping you can help me understand what is it I'm missing, right? How do we solve this? How do we make sure this happens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's something, as long as you can stay grounded in that shared mission, you'll probably be okay.
And one of the things I wonder about is if you have this this sense that you really don't like this person. You've had experiences in the past. You've got, I don't know, maybe some old grudges that haven't been addressed. What are some ways you can manage yourself so that that doesn't come up when you're needing to address this particular topic with this person?
So you can have incredible conversations with people you don't like. It's interesting. We have all this research on diversity, cognitive diversity in the workplace, right? And on teams. And the truth is that cognitive diversity is extremely good for you. It makes you more accurate and less error prone. It makes you more careful. It makes you a more creative problem solver. But the thing is that we don't like it. Humans don't enjoy it. We prefer when someone says, "Oh, I totally agree with you." That feels good. So just keep in mind that even though that person may disagree with you, and maybe they disagree with you all the time, that's a sign of cognitive diversity. You're not expected to like it. You probably never will enjoy it, but it will make you better in the end. So you can view them as giving you something, rather than constantly, we think of somebody who argues with us or points out flaws in our argument as someone who's irritating. But in fact, they are making you better. They're performing a service for you. And I'm not talking about abuse here, right? I mean, obviously, we're not talking about abuse, harassment, or a situation like that. We're talking about someone you don't like because they irritate you. Right. And they may continue to irritate you. That may never go away. They may be a cat person and you're a dog person. It doesn't matter. The disagreement between the two of you will make you both stronger.
I read an article recently about cultural fit and how we have to stop with that because of that very cognitive diversity. Cultural fit, if everybody fits into the same culture of a workplace, I'm talking workplace culture, if everybody fits into that and gets along and wants to hang out with each other and have a beer with each other, then you're not going to be as creative. And
that's very true. And you'll be way more prone to errors. Mm-hmm. So let's say they've done a lot of research on this and it's really enlightening. So they found that if you expect that there's somebody, you go into a meeting expecting that there might be someone in there who's going to disagree with you, you are more likely to prepare for that meeting. You're more likely to check your facts and check your data. And in the end, you'll be much more careful about how you perform pretty much every step of the way. And again, I want to be clear, you won't enjoy that more, but it will make you better. And then you can go home and relax and enjoy yourself and be with your friends who will tell you that you're awesome, right? That's totally fine. Consensus, it should never be your goal. Consensus is the enemy of innovation. Mm. Your goal is not to find the idea that everyone agrees on. A goal is to find the best of a diversity of ideas.
And so preparation is the key.
Yeah, I mean, you need to get yourself into the right mindset. And sometimes that requires you to really prepare mentally. It only takes a couple minutes. Stop and think, okay, what is my goal here? What am I working toward? What are we all working toward? And maybe ask yourself why it is you don't like that person, right? Because it doesn't really matter if you like your coworkers too much, right? You just need to be able to get along and work together. We don't have to share a beer with them.
You don't have to like them, but you should respect them, I think.
Absolutely. And be civil and both be working toward again, I hate to repeat myself, but a shared goal. That's all that you have to do. You don't need to go home and play Scrabble with them.
It's frustrating sometimes. I mean, I remember working with a particular person who, it was in a healthcare setting years ago, who was coasting to retirement and just didn't care, and treated patients and their families in ways that were quite awful. And it was very, very difficult for me to still work with this person when I could see the shortcuts, I could see the laziness, I could see the sitting in front of a computer playing solitaire or whatever she was doing when she was supposed to be caring for people. And it was exceedingly frustrating to try and work with this person when I fundamentally disagreed with her work ethic.
Yeah, did you ever address it with her?
I didn't at the time, and I've regretted that ever since. She was a lot older than I was, many years of seniority. I was quite a bit younger, and no excuse, but I don't think I was at the point where I was confident enough to be able to do that.
Oh, I can understand that. It does take a mistake. We make a lot of mistakes, and that makes us better in the end. But there was tons of times, and I certainly don't look to my younger self as any kind of example for anyone. I'm sure that any of my college buddies who now see that I'm an expert in conversation get a good laugh out of that, because I can guarantee you I was annoying in conversation. I was a horrible know-it-all. So, it's okay to let go of that. But for anybody who's listening, who's in that position, and I'm glad you brought it up, it's worth addressing it. It doesn't mean you're going to change their behavior. That's the thing. And if that's your goal going into it, you will most likely be frustrated. The goal is to go in and see, can I learn more about their perspective, figure out and understand better why they're making the choices they are, and can I clearly articulate without blame my own position and the effect that their actions are having on me.
And this is where I counsel people to use I language and begin from, this is what I'm noticing.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes people like that go forward and they make their decisions based on their story, right? We all have our own stories and our own versions of the stories we tell ourselves. It is often the case that we don't think about the effect of our actions on other people and how it impacts their daily working life, either positively or negatively. So sometimes the goal in your conversation is simply to swap stories. I want to hear yours, and let me tell you clearly mine.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you a question about when it's worth engaging in the conversation and when it's not. But we're going to take a quick break, but I'm going to begin when we get back with that question.
Are you procrastinating? Do you want to start a job search but aren't quite sure where to begin? Is it all just a little overwhelming? At Careers by Jen, we have a 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge to help you get unstuck and move toward finding your dream job. Every day for 5 days, you'll receive an email to your inbox that asks you to complete one task. Every task you complete moves you closer toward your goal. The best part about this challenge is that it's absolutely free. Come over to careersbyjen.com and you'll see the 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge on the right-hand side of the screen. Click on the image of Jen, sign up with your email address, and you'll be 5 days closer to reaching your goal. Why wait when you can get busy? Visit careersbyjen.com after this podcast.
So Celeste Headlee, I'm going to ask you, what ditch should you die in when it comes to having a hard conversation with someone you're working with that you don't agree with or don't like?
I hate to use the ditch you're going to die in.
I know, it's terrible.
Let's hope you're not going to die in any ditches, obviously. But since you put it that way, let's talk. You need to talk about things that are impacting you in a significant way. You need to at least articulate your own position. And, I think usually the error is not in talking about stuff. Usually the error is in avoiding these conversations. That's when I see the most problems coming up. And we will give ourselves all kind of excuses for why we shouldn't. right? It's kind of like the dialogue that goes into your head when you're trying to decide whether to go to the gym or not. And you come up with a million reasons why you can't go to the gym. I slept wrong and my arm's kind of sore. I'm going to put this off till tomorrow. We do the same thing about these conversations that we really need to have. You don't have to make it a thing. It can just be, hey, I don't know if you noticed, but, you came in a little late, and I was wondering, that ended up doing this to me, to my shift, and I'm wondering if there's anything I can do. Is there something I'm not understanding, or any way I can help you, blah, 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 blah. You don't have to turn it into a condemnation of their character in order to understand what's going on. And frankly, okay, so let's put it this way. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you needed to see your doctor. Let's say you had a knee problem. You needed to see your doctor. You had an appointment with them. You were looking forward to it because you were really having issues. And then your doctor's secretary calls up and says, we're going to have to delay this for 2 months. And you get really irritated, right? And then when you finally see your doctor, he says, or she says, I'm so sorry we delayed your appointment. I ended up having to go to Asia to treat patients who were affected by the typhoon. Now, you suddenly are not mad anymore, right?
Right.
Nothing changed about the facts of the incident. The only thing that changed was your view of it. You're not mad at him anymore because he was helping people. And so you can totally understand you're waiting a couple months so that he can go there and save people's lives. And sometimes this is the case in our workplaces as well, that all you really need is to get that other perspective. None of the facts may change, but you will feel better about it.
Yeah, I was recounting something I learned when I was teaching. I was teaching college in healthcare for a number of years, and a conversation I was teaching communications and human relations skills. We were having a conversation about stories and the fact that there is so much that we don't know about what's going on with other people, that we make assumptions and we have our own perceptions, and we tend to try and explain other people's behaviors from our point of view when we really don't know. And the conversation came up about particular culture of young women on public transit who stereotype, but it seemed to be that these women always sat on the aisle seat of the bus or the train, and didn't sit by the window and left the window seat empty. And people were saying, why is that? Why do I notice that? Why do I notice that? And then there was a young woman from that culture in the class, and she said, I can tell you why. She says, the country that I come from, it is exceedingly common for young girls to be sexually touched, harassed, assaulted on public transit. And from the time they're 5, they're taught never let yourself sit in the window seat because you'll get boxed in and you won't be able to do anything about it. It's like, look both ways before you cross the street. It's ingrained into you when you're a child. And there was this whole completely legitimate reason for people sitting on the aisle and not moving over. And everyone in the class sort of went, oh. So it just took a little bit of understanding of what was going on for that person, rather than saying, she's rude, she won't move over, why, etc., whatever people were saying.
Yeah, and again, none of the facts changed.
No.
we get so caught up in trying to establish who did what at what time and the details of things. And what really is important is your view of it, your attitude toward it. And so, going back to your original question, when should I have that conversation? Sooner rather than later. Just don't bring all that baggage to it. As they say, I think is a fact, you think is a guess.
And it takes a certain amount of courage, doesn't it, in some cases? That with the person that I didn't address, that I was working with, I was working in the capacity of being the clerk, the coordinator at the desk, and this was a nursing professional. So there was a hierarchy there, as well as an age difference and an experience difference. So I was probably afraid to say anything.
I think it does take courage at the beginning, but here's an interesting wrinkle to this. We tend to be afraid of some of these conversations, and it turns out research shows we really don't have a lot to be afraid of. There's this great study called the liking gap, and they followed some people around for a year, trying to figure out what it is that's making us avoid conversations. And what they found is that we're so concerned about how we come off. We're so concerned about, was what I said smart? Was it funny? Was it racist? What's that look that they're liking? Are they looking at my sweater? What's wrong with my sweater? We get so caught up in these that we miss the unconscious signals they're giving us that they just like talking to us and they're fine. It turns out that people like you more than you think. And they enjoy your conversation more than you realize. You're not paying attention enough. You're too caught up in your inner monologue, and you're too afraid of what's going to happen. People are afraid, it turns out, of conversations, even if they can't call to mind a conversation that went bad. They'll say, I'm concerned it's going to go wrong. You'll say, well, give me an example of a conversation that went wrong. They can't think of one. And yet they're still afraid to have that conversation. So, I mean, the answer is, it's going to be okay. The bravery is to get over yourself.
I heard that our biggest addiction as a human race is our own thinking.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right. And it turns out that people who are the more caught up in their own thinking, they lose all kinds of things like compassion. So, yeah. Get out of your head.
In one of your books that I was able to look at, you talked about mindfulness and meditation and how that can help in communication. Can you say a little bit about that?
Sure. I think the first step is always, I can't tell you stop interrupting people if you realize that you're interrupting them, right? It doesn't help to look back at a conversation 30 minutes after it's happened and go, oh, wait, I think I interrupted them a bunch of times. You need to, in the moment, be aware of what you're saying, which makes it imperative that you have some kind of mindfulness about the moment and presence at that time, which is in our era of distraction and what they call absent presence, which is the state of continuously giving everything partial focus. That's really difficult to do. It's always about pulling somebody into the moment so they're listening to what they say and listening to what the other person says as it is said. Instead of, 20 minutes later going, did they call me fat? Whatever it may be, I want them to be present. And that requires some kind of mindfulness, which doesn't come naturally to people, which means you're probably going to have to do some training.
I was listening to Eckhart Tolle the other day in a podcast, and just coming back to, oh, I'm breathing. Look at that. I'm breathing. And bringing yourself back into the moment.
And that's all mindfulness training is, right? I mean, one of the ways that you train your mind is by simply paying attention to your breathing and let the thoughts come in and go out, because there's no such thing as clearing your mind. You're not going to be able to stop those thoughts from coming in. You just have to learn to let them go and not hang on to them.
I'm sure we've all found ourselves in the horrifying situation where you've been pretending to listen. And doing all of the right things, nodding and smiling and all the minimal encouragers. And then all of a sudden realize that you have no living idea what they're talking about.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of trying to pretend then that they had been listening that whole time, right? When the reasonable thing to do, because they have probably noticed that you weren't paying attention. Human beings are quite accurate in knowing when someone's paying attention to us and when they're not. So you're not getting away with it. That's number one. But number two,
Dang.
It's just say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, my mind wandered. But I really want to hear what you're saying. Can you go back to blah, blah, what was the last thing you remember? Or can we rewind just a little bit? Because I got distracted and I want to hear what you have to say. They don't mind, and most people don't mind. They don't mind repeating themselves because it means you're actually paying attention. The neurology is on your side. Allowing someone the opportunity to talk about themselves is very pleasurable to them. It's a dopamine stimulator. It makes them feel very, very good. So it is okay at that point to be honest. And what's more, by being honest about it, you're actually building trust, as opposed to if you suddenly try to pretend like you are paying attention, that's eroding trust.
It's pretty obvious too.
Yeah. You're not getting, again, you are fooling no one. You are not David Oyelowo, who is so great at acting that he can pretend he's really engaged. No. You are not getting away with it.
So Celeste, tell me how you got interested and excited, and when did you develop a love for communication?
Because it's literally been my job for 20 years. I literally interview people for a living as a host and reporter for public radio. And when you do that day after day after day with every possible kind of person, whether it's a senator or a kindergarten teacher, you start to really see how your questions and your listening ability changes the tenor of the conversation. I can change someone else because I'm a good listener, and then they become a good talker. So that's when I started to sort of look to improve my own skills. But I really got passionate about it when I realized that our lack of good conversation was eroding all kinds of things in our lives. For me, I first noticed the disintegration of political conversations because I'm a reporter, and people who disagreed, people would go into Congress, representatives, and argue about policy, and then they'd go home and have dinner together or celebrate their kids' birthday parties together, and they would talk to each other like human beings. That does not happen anymore, and I think we can see the result on Capitol Hill. I think we can see the result in our own personal lives. The fact that we think that if you disagree if one person voted for Trump and one person voted for Bernie, you can't talk to them, or you have nothing else to say to that person. And we see it in the workplace all the time, because surveys since the 2016 election especially show that more and more people are arguing about things on the job, even when they're told not to talk about politics, that people's motivation has fallen dramatically, that people's stress level has gone up because of talking about politics. It's really affecting us, and avoiding it isn't helping. And that's what sort of made me passionate about figuring out how to solve it.
Because we're meant to communicate, as a species, we're built to communicate. We do it all of the time. And you're right. I think we can find unity and collaboration and connection if we can learn to listen to each other and to talk to each other in real ways.
Yeah, we are literally evolved to listen to another person's voice. There is all kinds of ways in which we have specifically and specially evolved in order to pick up on things in a human voice. I asked one scientist, do you think at some point text will equal the voice in terms of good communication? And she said, well, it's possible in about 5,000 to 10,000 years, because evolution doesn't move that fast. So yeah, you think of it this way. Imagine you call your friend and they pick up the phone and say hello, and you say, what's wrong? That is how fast you pick up on information in someone else's voice that cannot be replicated in a text or an email. So choosing not to use this highly specialized, highly sophisticated tool that communicates so beautifully and instead send an email is a terrible, terrible mistake.
And it's causing all sorts of conflict everywhere, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is. We know through research that when you send emails, you're less likely to collaborate, you're less likely to cooperate, and you're more likely to escalate conflict. We also know that you're way less persuasive in email than you are in person or on the phone if you're asking somebody to do something for you. And also, if you're going to apologize to someone, everybody sends emails as apologies because it's easier for them. But it turns out that, the process of apology that begins in the part of your brain that deals with compassion is a relatively lengthy process before you get to, I forgive you and let's move on and put it behind us. When you send a text of any kind, if it's written in text saying, I'm sorry, that part of the brain never becomes active, which means the process never begins, which means it's never completely forgotten or forgiven, which means you never actually moved on. So are you really saving yourself time by sending the email? Or are you actually not saving yourself time at all because you haven't accomplished what you thought you accomplished? You got to pick up the phone or see that person face to face.
And you would recommend that if you needed to have a conversation with a colleague would be to make physical time to see them or time on the phone to at least speak verbally.
Yeah, because otherwise it's just a complete waste of time. I mean, you just haven't accomplished anything. The reason we avoid apologizing is because it's hard and it makes us feel awkward. But here's the thing. When somebody either hears our voice struggling or trying to find words, or they see our face looking kind of pained, suddenly the compassion area of the brain lights up and the process begins that leads toward forgiveness. It is the difficulty that makes that apology valuable. It's because it's hard that it's actually worthwhile. So by avoiding the difficulty, you're taking all of the meaning and value out of the apology.
I wish this was taught in high school.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting, isn't it, that we offer so many public speaking courses and no public listening courses. Human beings are born knowing how to speak. I mean, that's the first thing a baby does is scream. That's how they survive, right?
Right.
They got to scream to get somebody's attention so they can get help. There are species who rely on their listening ability to survive. We're not one of them. It's the listening half that we have trouble with, not usually the speaking.
In my day job that I do, I'm a church minister, and one of the public events that we're hosting in August is a listening station. And we're training volunteers to sit one-to-one with members of the public for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or however long they want, and just to hear their story. And I've got the outline, I've got the training information, I've got what needs to be done. And a colleague that had done this in her community who sent me the material said the hardest part of it was to train the volunteers to actually just listen, to not debate, to not rebut, to not explain, but just to hear somebody's story. And she said that was the hardest part of the whole activity.
Because yes, it is difficult, and it can be really tiring. And that's why I often say, if you're not, if you can't give it your full attention, it's probably best to excuse yourself and come back if that's possible. But you got to keep in mind that there's 3 kinds of listening. There's evaluative listening, there's interpretive listening, and there's transformative listening. So evaluative listening, your listening is sort of somebody else's responsibility. It's when you're immediately responding to someone else's comment with a judgment about whether it's correct or incorrect, or whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, right? You're just evaluating it to see where you intersect and what you think about it. In interpretive listening, you're responding kind of similarly, but you're offering an interpretation of what you've heard or asking for clarification. So interpretive listening is real listening. But it's also finding where you intersect, but you're actually trying to respond to what you've heard. Interpretive listening is totally okay. Now, the deepest form of listening is transformative. And that's when you've entered into this where you are open to changing your mind. That is so rare. I mean, think about this. When was the last time a conversation actually changed your mind on something real? Not on whether carrots should be used in, I don't know, a potato salad, but on like, here's my views of the death penalty. It's so rare that occurs. But it's where transformative listening requires that you see the other person as having a valid point of view that is equal to your own, independent and valid, even if you don't agree with it. And that's the kind of listening we rarely engage in.
And that's the kind of listening that I think takes practice and time.
I agree. Absolutely.
So Celeste, if people want to know more and hear about your books and all the stuff that you're doing, where can they find you?
I think the easiest thing, it's almost everything is just my name. So that my name is my handle on Instagram and on Twitter. But the easiest thing is just to go to my website, which is celesteheadlee.com, and everything's there. My blog, all my stuff.
I'm going to spell it out because podcast listeners often aren't in front of anything they can write. So CelesteHeadlee.com?
That's correct. HEAD, like your body part.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And do you have one last piece of advice for the Careers by Jen listener?
Yes, I would say your phone is deeply distracting to your brain and to the other brains of the people you're talking to, whether it's your workplace or with a friend. Even if you don't realize it, your brain is thinking about that phone and preparing for a notification to come in. So if you truly want to have a productive conversation with someone else, you can't just put the phone down. You have to put it away.
Excellent piece of advice. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been very informative.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Careers by Jen with Jen Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. If every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.